So tell me about your podcast.
So we're basically like a writing book literature podcast. We do everything from kind of like book club talks about certain books to author interviews and things like this. And yeah, basically that's the gist of it. Yeah, where are you out there? You're outside of St. Louis, you said, right?
Outside of St. Louis. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
So
That's right.
I've only been there once, and that was just to drive through. But
Yeah. Well, I don't blame you. Um,
and it was the
um,
tourist area, the park, with the arch. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's pretty common. Um, hey, a lot of your episodes are really long. What are you open to shorter one, or you always like it to go long?
We usually just go till we're finished, essentially. So we usually do about like an hour and a half or so. Probably like an hour to an hour and a half interview, and then I usually do like a 20-minute bonus segment, something like that. So
Oh,
I always
you add something on the end that's part of the length.
yeah, we usually will do like a little bonus kind of like rapid fire question for paying subscribers only. So feel free to let loose on that paywall content. But yeah, that's why
Okay.
I try to let everybody know. There's like 2 hour block is probably the max. If we go through something like
Okay.
this. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Is there like, okay, there's an audience for that length. That's fascinating.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. That said, the most popular podcast in the world goes 3 4 hour episodes. Yeah, yeah. I don't know why it works, but for some reason, people like to hear us talk about writing and publishing and your life. And yeah, we're just chatting about books, literature, being a writer. All that good stuff. And again, about your life too. I like to tailor it to each author here. And again, Wes always gives me these kind of very interesting writers that have, come from a large, very wide background of different things that I'm always curious about.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No! Dinner,
Resources.
life, friends is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Whitstead, and you are listening to Heavy Board. And we're recording this on October 26th, 2024. My guest today is Doug Villhard. Doug is an entrepreneur, founding everything from software companies to venture capitalist firms. He's a professor of business, where he heads the top-ranked business school at Washington University, St. Louis. And he and his wife Diane even founded their own school, Father McGivney Catholic School, in his hometown. Doug founded Second Street Media in 2007 with his longtime business partner, Matt Cohen, and the pair went on to great success. And on top of all that, listeners, Doug is also a writer. His debut novel, titled Company of Women, came out in 2022 from Mabel Publishing, quickly followed by his second novel, titled City of Women, in 2023. And his latest book, The Golden Age of Red, was published just this year. The Golden Age of Red is an immersive work of historical fiction that follows Red Grange, a college football star in the Roaring '20s. More than that, listeners, Doug is a family man who stresses the importance of community, locally and broader, and he doesn't shy away from a challenge. And more importantly, he writes fiction, and he writes it for the love of the game. Doug, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We like to start this off for some of the same question we ask all writers, which is, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did this start to form the life of Doug Villhard?
Yeah, well, so I grew up outside of St. Louis, and it's I'm always fascinated by like those tortured writers, if you will, but that's not me. I mean, it was my parents are still married today and doing awesome, and suburban life, and kind of the American dream, if you will. I think the only thing for me was I just at a pretty young age, I liked to do that thing where I was like, hey mom, look at this. Hey mom, look at this. And I think those were the things that that kind of excited me the most. So so I liked getting her attention, if you will, and sometimes to get her attention, like telling stories, if you will, or exaggerating stories, right. If you will. So, but otherwise, just your like typical, 70s childhood.
Yeah. What did your parents do?
My mom's a teacher, and my dad's an engineer at the time McDonnell Douglas. Those were like fighter jets in St. Louis, and then eventually Boeing.
That's fantastic. I love that, hearing that too, kind of the idyllic kind of childhood I feel like it's an exaggeration. There's always like with writers going on and on about like, oh, I had a death in the family and my parents hated me. I was an orphan, something. It's like, most of us had kind of, I don't know how true that is. I guess it's more so like, it's like a fantasy people have from like the early, like kind of, post World War I era. That like maybe that was a little rougher. Your dad died in war or something, but yeah, we didn't.
I don't know, or maybe that's what it takes to be a really good writer, or a famous writer. To like really feel that pain, if you will. But that wasn't my story, and I'm glad it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I said the suburban life too. Like, everybody criticizes suburban life. I'm like, I love suburbs. I loved growing up in the suburbs. I love living in them now. It's way better.
Yeah, I know. What a terrible thing, like to feel safe all the time. We're ridiculous.
Absolutely, yeah. The next question we like to ask is, when did reading come into your life? When did you start becoming interested in books, reading? Like you said, you like to tell stories when you were a kid. When did that start coming into your life?
Yeah, well, I feel fortunate not to born in 71, no internet, right? That kind of stuff. So, I feel fortunate where reading was like important and kind of necessary. There wasn't that much television content and such like that. So for me, it was really an escape. When it was like Scholastic Day at school, when you could buy the books and all that kind of stuff. Yes. Those were the best. But my favorite were Choose Your Own Adventure books because it kind of put me in the pilot seat, if you will. But always at a young age, reading was my thing.
Yeah, those Scholastic book fairs. I remember my mother turning me on to like Encyclopedia Brown and stuff. With you could flip through all that stuff as a kid, and it was just exhilarating. Yeah, we like. Yeah, I love that.
I saw a meme the other day on the internet. It was like Scholastic Book Day, like my first lesson in buying things I don't need, basically.
yes.
But I love that. Yeah.
And by the time I was born in 89, so I'm a millennial. But when the time I got to the book fairs, like there was like all kinds of stuff other than books there too. It was like toys and like weird things like that. Like
that kind of defeats the purpose. But right? Yeah, I can imagine. Why read Harry Potter when you can play with the doll?
Exactly. Yeah. And going off of that, what were some of the first writers you were enamored with, or who are your go-to inspirations or idols in the literary world?
Well, let's see here. So, I mean, Stephen King.
Oh yes.
I just really loved him. I think it wasn't just like being scared, if you will, but it was also just the concept of the fact that he the fact that he really puts you into this world, and they were worlds I'd not been in before. I'm not from Maine, for example, and those types of things, and there weren't that many scary things in suburbia, either. So he was a writer that absolutely caught my attention. And then hold on a second. Oh yeah. And then, but probably then as I got older, the Pat Conroy is probably my most go-to writer because he was willing, especially like when I was in college and stuff like that. He was really talking about like real things that were like affecting me too at that time too, like girls and dating and parents and friendships and little darker stuff. And not that Stephen King's wasn't darker, but it's more mysterious. But his was more real life, and those things caught my attention. But those are the folks I think too the most. But I'm boring too. I mean, I like John Grisham, and I like those kind of stories that are like quick reads, if you will. But Stephen King and Pat Conroy were my go-tos.
That's fantastic. I'm a big Stephen King head, yeah, and I put myself in this position where I always defend Stephen King in terms of literary merit, where everybody kind of criticizes, oh, those are just pop genre. It's like, well, you're underestimating how much that influences the literary side of things. It does quite a bit. And his books, he just has that style where you can't put it down. Like, and no matter what it is, like even his lesser books, like, he has so many of them, but it's like, you just can't stop. Like, he has this great style that's just pulls you through the story. It's,
I think tell me somebody who's both so successful in terms of like pop culture, but also from literary fans too. It's like
right.
He's got to be about it. Does that make him perfect and on either side? No, but does that make him pretty incredible in both? Yes.
Right.
So
and the range. The range.
Yeah.
He doesn't do just horror. I know he gets pegged as this horror guy because his first 5-6 books were all horror, but he goes all over the place. With great books that go all over the place too. I had a writer on here the other day that was like, the Shawshank Redemption was like one of his favorites. I was like, yeah, and that's not horror. That's not any supernatural. Like, it is just a great story that like is told in his style, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. And I just read You Like It Darker too, which is his new short story anthology, and that was just fantastic. There's a story in there called Willie the Weirdo, which I highly recommend everybody. It's actually, I think if it's 4 pages or 5 pages long, I'd be surprised. It's a very short story. It will not go out of my head. I highly recommend that one.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I haven't read his latest, but yeah, that's fantastic. You're an entrepreneur. I wanted to ask, how did you get started with that? Like when you going into being an entrepreneur, everybody likes to call themselves an entrepreneur, but like, how was that started? Was it just luck? Did you fall into it? Was it something you set out to do? How did, you get involved in all that?
Yeah. So when I was, I had all these hints of it, like in college, like making T-shirts, like for fraternities and sororities, and like making porch swings and like mowing lawns. Like I had all this stuff. I didn't know. We didn't use the word entrepreneurship though at the time, so that word's been around forever, but it's only been really used less than 20 years ago. So I didn't know. But I was always told that you should get a job. Get a job. So I didn't really know that you could be one. And I worked at Disney for a couple of years. And then I had a child. We moved back to St. Louis, and the biggest internet company I could find in 1998 was the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's website. And I met a guy there who was starting a company and raising money for it. And I joined him. And so that's when I first even realized that you could even do it and kind of how the world worked. And then since then, I kind of never looked back, both doing that one. That ended up being a company. Today, it's known as Max Preps. It's like the ESPN of high school sports. It's owned by CBS. So that was a pretty good place to start. Then I started a bunch of other ones, some terrible, some very successful. I'm like financially retired, if you will. And now most of the time when I'm not writing, I teach it at Washington University in St. Louis. And so I have undergrads and grad students and PhD students. So I've really immersed myself, if you will, not just in being one, but in teaching the next generation too. But I think it comes back all the way back to what we were talking about before, which is, hey mom, look what I did, look what I made, and I don't think that's much different than starting a company.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask, what was that like? I want to get to your second career here as a teacher too, but what was that like? Like in terms of getting, even like doing a startup back then too, like you said, 2007. Terrifying, emboldening. What were the feelings like to start something new at that time, where the internet was starting to kind of take over and starting a company within that?
Yeah, so all three of my books, although they're fiction, historical fiction, I would consider them to be a biographical fiction. They're based on real life entrepreneurs. The books allowed me to do was really to lean into, like, sort of through these characters, like expressing what it was like for me, being an entrepreneur too. So reading my books is like seeing what it's like, but it's basically. Like being on the gambling table. It's basically like having chips all over the board, and like all your chips, all your entire wealth laid out on the board, and you don't know what's going to happen. And that sort of feeling like that is, I'm not like a drug user and stuff like that, but I think it has to be as close as being like just like out of your mind, basically, just full out stimulus, and it's a lot of fun, dangerous game though, right? Just like all things, just all high risk, high reward things, but a lot of fun. But when I was younger, especially. I loved it because every day was new, and I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not the dumbest guy either. So, but it's fun to have my brain being fully stimulated, if you will. And that's to me, that's what entrepreneurship is about. And 90% of startups fail, 90%. And so I feel very fortunate not to have, and fortunate to get to teach people how to avoid it happening. But even my students, even my investments that I make in early startups, 9 out of 10 fail. So it's quite a ride.
Yeah, it's exhilarating, I imagine. Yeah. And this is where I get to the day. You sold your startup and were able to retire. Yeah. Why get into teaching college? Were you always drawn to teaching? What made you want to get into teaching?
I was drawn. I do love teaching. I did it when I was in grad school too. It just didn't pay what I wanted it to pay. but once I took care of that, I was able to do it. But I find it to be extremely rewarding. By the way, they say if you really want to learn something, teach it. And when I'm sort of on stage, if you will, when I'm giving a lecture, when there's anywhere from 50 to 200 kids in the audience, you have to use all parts of your brain in order to deliver that. It's not just like reading off PowerPoints. I mean, people are asking questions, people are throwing out ideas, people are pitching ideas. You've got to give immediate feedback to it. So the rush during that, I think, is fantastic. And I mean, my wife's incredibly supportive on all the things that I do, but I also kind of promised I wouldn't get back on the gambling table too. so this is a way to kind of like get that rush, if you will, and live vicariously through my students who are starting their companies, being incredibly successful both in their companies, and innovating within larger organizations too. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I taught college, not business, but I taught English for about 10 years. And it's, I think that is the best part of the classroom. I always called it like the energy of a classroom, where you just kind of the back and forth that you get. Like it's, and people do underestimate it. Where like you're giving not you called it a stage, but it is kind of like you're giving not a performance, if you will, but kind of a presentation. You have to present this information to a room full of people that maybe aren't that interested in what you have to say, and you have to make it interesting. And then, field questions as they come in. You're kind of doing this dance up there the whole time, and it really does energize you when you're doing that. I guess, you can burn out too. People say, teacher burnout, but that's fantastic.
Yeah, it is fun. And, I do like all those things that you said, and I did say all those things that I said. But the real joy is when they get it, when they're listening, when they understand. Really almost every day they teach me something too, and that's maybe the most fun of it. But it's not really about me. It's just about having my mind stimulated, and that part I really like.
And going off that, I wanted to ask you about college teaching and kind of like, the actual industry and what it's looking like right now, kind of using more part-time workers in place of full-time workers. I just wanted your thoughts on this. And this is the type of podcast, we don't need definitive answers, just, Doug's thoughts on this, what do you make of that the kind of part-timing of like college teaching, and why do you think it's happening?
Yeah, I'm not as aware of those trends, actually. I happen to be at a fairly elite institution, if you will. So I don't know that those trends are necessarily affecting us. What are you referencing in particular?
Basically the kind of the adjuncting world of college teaching. For me, yeah, I was not at a place like Washington University, St. Louis. I was on the community college circuit or the state school circuit. And that's basically what's happening there. Like where somebody retires, a full professor will retire. They won't replace that. They'll just hire 4 or 5 part-time adjuncts to replace that teaching load because, and there's all kinds of speculation around it. So I was just curious of your thoughts. Like people would say, oh, it's the economic model. It's, it's cheaper to do that than it is to hire a full professor for the rest of their life, and pay them a nice salary and stuff. But I know it is different when you go up to different levels of the institutions. When you're in the R1 institutions, it's less. But I've heard stories, but I just, Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on the industry, but I will say that I have a bias. I mean, I think it's a caste system, really. There's the tenured professors and those that want to be tenured, and then there's folks like me that are practitioners.
Right.
So the tenureds hold on pretty strong, to the past. But I think in a subject matter like writing or like entrepreneurship, I do think the students are very interested in teachers that are doing it or have done it. And I think that makes a ton of sense, where I don't know, biology or science or something like that might be a little bit different. But I'm afraid I'm in a little bit of a elitist bubble. So I'm not seeing all those trends.
Oh yeah. Yeah, hey, that's nothing wrong with that. That's for sure. That's where everybody else wants to be. That's,
I guess, yeah.
And then going off, well, not even about college anymore, but what drew you to writing after, you had such this great career in business. You're teaching now business very successly. Why write novels? One of the worst business models out there. What got you into writing novels?
Yeah. So actually, I have 2 graduate degrees. One is an MBA, right, business degree. But I also have one in film and television from Boston University. So when I started out, I was very interested in writing screenplays. And but what I realized though, and my writing is very similar to that, not necessarily screenplays, but in visual storytelling. But I realized though, just like traditional publishing, I'm at the whim of someone else to say, yes, we would like to make that. And by the way, I watched these people have like 20-year screenwriting careers and never have anything actually made too. So that's like, This is like a fascinating place. But then when I had more time on my hand after selling the company and such like that, and this was a passion I wanted to get back to, I realized that if I wrote a book, I wouldn't necessarily need anyone else's permission, before the world could see it. So my books are very much books, but they read like you're watching the movie. And so anyway, it just became a way for me to find an audience for what I really like, which is visual storytelling.
That's something Stephen King has said too, where he said he treats writing novels like a movie, like, visualizing everything that you would see as if it were coming across on the screen, and that really does help. I mean, there was like a shift when movies became the big thing. Well, it changed the way novels are written now. Like, from that kind of early 20th century, shifted everything in terms of how people write novels. And people forget that novels are another source of entertainment now, like especially now where they're just, I'd rather watch TV because it's just more passive. But it's like, no, this is another form of entertainment on, just like television or movies and all of that. Did you ever try to do like script writing? Like, did you go for that kind of stuff when you were in college? Like, like putting your stuff out there and trying to get, like, you have to go through that process, just like writing the agents and all of that to even get a chance. You said at the whim of somebody who's going to say yes. Did you?
I did all. I draw stuff. Yeah, and I think what was.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.